Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support, rockfin.com/Around the Empire, patreon.com/Around the Empire, or paypal.me/Around the Empire pod. And also please like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Alison McDowell joins us today. We talk about her research into Agenda 21, the transformation of education, the natural systems being financialized, the biosecurity state, stakeholder capitalism, and more. In a bonus question, we talk about why the Great Reset, or the New Normal agenda, seems to have been fast-tracked, and if there are common threads in the institutions and entities who are behind it. Alison McDowell is a mom, a prolific researcher, a producer of network mapping and reporting on her independent media site, wrenchinthegears.com, and on her YouTube channel. We recorded this on April 19th, 2021. Alison McDowell is here speaking to us from Philadelphia. Hello, Alison. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and it's great to meet you.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me.
If you would, just take a minute or two to introduce yourself since it's first time on the podcast.
Sure. So, as I said, I'm based in Philadelphia. I'm a mom and an independent researcher, and I have a blog. It's called wrenchinthegears.com, wrench like the tool. And I really started out focused on researching sort of the money and power behind the privatization of public education in my city and then writ large, and the role that technology was playing in that space, and that which led me down the path of sort of the financialization of human life, not just in education settings, but also in all aspects of privatized public services, including healthcare, housing, food access, all of these things, because I live in a city that's a big city that's very poor. So we are a target of this, and these innovative finance instruments, a lot of them were developed at Wharton Business School, which is part of the University of Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. So I have sort of a macro lens and a micro lens of things that I've experienced in my community that then apply to much larger systems connected through, the World Bank and, global financial apparatus. It's like, you go down 3 steps down the road and there you are, in a much bigger world.
Yeah. And from the foreign policy, the war foreign policy perspective, I can appreciate that, where you sort of step into this to learn, just to be more informed, let's say, and you go down a rabbit hole or two. The rabbit hole is a way too small a word for this, but you follow, you're a curious person, maybe a divergent thinker, and you start following things, and maybe you stick with it, you're interested in it, you stick with it for years, and certain things reoccur, and over time a bigger picture emerges. And so I can relate to the way that this got started, the way, how you got into this, and the kind of machine that you encountered somewhere along that way. Yeah.
Because the flip side of being in Philadelphia, like my research into education, I connected with some people who were doing research around the social impact finance, the human capital. But it was also my education into larger systems of political economy. Like my background is in art history and historic preservation. So it was not computers or finance or economics or any of the things that I needed to learn to come to this space, but like re-examining the myths of democracy in the United States, particularly in Philadelphia, which, many sort of lean into the Constitution. But then as we're approaching what appears to be increasingly like world digital enslavement, of looking at what Philadelphia was, as the Constitution was put in place, as George Washington, the first president, was trying to figure out how to keep his slaves, his property in a city of free Blacks, like under the Constitution, like we have this really complex history. So we have both the mythological nature of that history, and then we have these other resistance movements that are also embedded in Philadelphia, MOVE and the Black Panthers and other elements that are not normally surfaced unless you start, you're of that world of sort of interrogating the underpinnings of how this actually operates. And, for me, a lot of what I look at, what's coming with Agenda 21 and this pivot is looking at both enslavement and indigenous genocide and dispossession. And this was all happening when I was learning this when Standing Rock, and I had a friend who was connected there. And so I watched those live streams that day. And when people were taking treaty stands, Regina Brave, to see these MRAPs coming down the hill and sort of waging war on an, indigenous elder who was standing up for her, agreed upon rights as a sovereign nation to the US empire. And to me, I confided in you before. I was like, I had always been like an NPR listening, like recovering liberal. I always thought the world mostly worked out right. And so it was this very big awakening for me, both seeing documents that had this very strange dystopian future, and then meeting people who opened my eyes to the past and how this past resonates forward to this future that is this continuum. It was a really tricky couple of years processing all of that, like a lot of guilt, a lot of like, oh, how is it that I'm, 50 years old and I never learned these things? I thought I was smart. I'm not smart the way I thought I was. And then revisiting your life and sort of the larger world with a new lens. So that's sort of how I came into, and this global health, biosecurity state unfolding was, if I hadn't gone through that process, that awakening that was, again, linked into Philadelphia's history and the mythology of that, I wouldn't be prepared to interrogate what's happening now under sort of management of human bodies as these sort of health assets, in this different nature. What I've talked about, like mentioned to you, the war on carbon-based life, the human body and natural systems being financialized for both financial products and biotech.
I totally relate to the journey. However you got on that, train. A number of us have done the same thing. It's not easy. Some of us, it's not necessarily linear, as we were talking about a little bit before. Sometimes you step in, you really don't like it, and you step out again. You just choose to. I mean, I have myself at times thought, it would be a lot easier if I just didn't look at any of this, if I, just go along with the status quo and all that. But I don't think you can unsee the things that you have unseen. It's uncomfortable. You can understand why you end up, being shunned because it makes other people uncomfortable. Why it's so difficult to explain, because first of all, it's complicated and uncomfortable. But anyway, I can appreciate how you went down this path and where you find yourself now. Frankly, I don't even want to know about some of these things. The things
I know. I never wanted to know about the internet of bio-nano things, but people have known about it for 20 years. I mean, and then once you realize that, you're like, oh, like you're never meant to know until it's, the media is never going to tell you these. How selective our understanding of the world really is.
I might have ignored a lot of it, except that is probably one thing that the Davos World Economic Forum people, they laid it right out pretty brazenly. I just listened to some speech by Klaus Schwab, who, it still shocks me that they put him out as a front man on this. He's got to be one of the most unconvincing, bad stereotype for people of my generation, a couple and any generation before mine, right? I mean, there are certain accents and nationalities that were demonized all through the Cold War and through World War II. It just shocks me that they would put this guy out front as the person to trust and don't worry. But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just listened to one of his speeches, just titled The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a book he wrote back in the 70s, right? Which was the time when the financial system collapsed. That's when it really did collapse. It's been propped up ever since then with debt. But anyway, I listened to it. I was expecting to hear a lot of profound things, but he didn't say anything very detailed, but he touched on some big topics like the ones you're saying, the genetic aspect of it, the transformation, just this obsession with transformation And he starts to give the overwhelming reasons why this needs to be done, but he strays off a little bit into hints of, populism as a worrisome thing, that kind of thing. He sort of like reveals that, but he talks about, of course, the environment. He talks about three big topics he mentioned: um, CO2. Um, I can't remember the third one, but then the second one, but then the third one was plastics, the amount of plastics in the world, which didn't seem to fit exactly. I don't know. It was odd, the three things that he said were driving him. So, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I may have sort of brushed a lot of these things off, except I hear people in these global institutions broadcasting similar messages with a very noble philanthropic um, veneer publicly.
Well, I mean, we are poised in this moment of a shift to a new level of industrialization. I mean, that is being planned out by the
That's
most
true.
powerful interests. And in order for this to happen, they're creating these social impact investment markets. They're framing it as good capitalism, stakeholder capitalism,
Right.
ESG investing, environmental, social governance investing. And it's all being driven by data and metrics. So we
Can
are
you
putting
step
it.
back just one step, and explain a little bit about stakeholder capitalism? It's a big buzzword, but not that many people talk about what it means.
Right. So essentially, if you understand that the imperative of capitalism is continued growth, right? At
Probably,
this
yeah.
point, the wealth is so concentrated that the masses can no longer consume or circulate enough liquidity to keep that system going. So it moves into the debt finance model. And the last time out, that was embedded within the housing and real estate market, right? And so there were these derivatives created based on real assets that were people's homes that were then bundled as tranches of investment and traded and gambled on, because that was really all we're a global economy built on war, toxins, and debt. So the debt game needed to go on through the housing. In the decade since then, decade plus, that wealth has only become even more concentrated. And so the next asset that is going to be bundled as asset-backed securities will be both financialized people as debt, and then the financialization of nature through the carbon trading systems. They will
Right.
financialize both human life through poverty, largely people who are impoverished, and financializing nature. And that will all be run through the world banking systems. And they will frame it as social impact investing, the good kind of capitalism. We are going to start to fix all of these problems that we created by unlocking capital to work, on these issues. But it will all be driven by data, and the technology sector will run everything. And now we have data that analytics that will, with the Internet of Things, these sensors, everything will be embedded in sensors. All of the environments they're imagining will be smart. Smart paint, smart pavement, stick a sensor on a tree, stick a sensor in your bloodstream. Everything is part of this cybernetic system, which is what Brzezinski was imagining back in the 70s. And then the technocrats even earlier than that at the, Columbia School of Industrial Engineering, way back in the day. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name in the 1890s. Thorsten Veblen, whatever. Like, there's been this long system of like this imagining of a planetary computer. And so this is how these crazy people are both going to keep their cash flow going, because they will financialize us and control us in the process, and frame it as this progressive idealism, because look, we're going to fix the problem, and it's all connected to these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. How wonderful. 2/3 of these goals are about managing poor people. And there's a few over here that are about managing the world. But all of it has to be put on digital surveillance so that we can track and get credit for the wonderful things we've done. And what that means is that life on this planet has to become virtualized. And so capitalism is going to go inward into the virtual world. That's where it can continue to grow in the concept indefinitely is not in the physical material world, but in a cybernetic world, in a digitally twinned world that will live in a data center, that will live in synthetic DNA, that will live on a silicon chip. And so this virtual world construction is largely connected to the rise of crypto economics. And if I'm not a big video game player, but the gaming industry, the Entertainment Software Association, is actually about building this virtual world. But the virtual world, the gamification of this virtual world is fundamentally militarized. All of the cloud computing, all of the blockchain, everything is a military construct. And so it is meant to be appear benign and fun and engaging. And that is where there's the combination of Disney and the Hollywood industry with the video game design, but it is a military compound that we are entering in this virtual world. And that this world that they would like us to live in as an avatar, as a cartoon representation of ourselves. Well, so that's it's a bit mind boggling, but that I believe is this larger plan. And they will virtualize, they will kill the world because at the same time they're collecting the data to fulfill their obligations for these environmental sustainable governance investments, these the good capitalism investments. The data process will continue to mine the planet with child labor, will continue to run on water to cool the server farms, to the dirty energy to run the energy systems, the e-waste of all of the devices and all the sensors. These sensors aren't indefinite. They have a lifespan, then you need more sensors. And so we're actually killing the planet under the name of greening it, sustainability, to build a virtual world. And that virtual world will be a world where they will be largely, these forces out of Davos will be in control of it.
So the virtual world, the ultimate purpose of it is to profit, to continue a system of profiting off of people. Because I understand now that, and I saw, what is his name, Professor Wolf, when he does some videos that are little explainers, and one of them is, what is the Great Reset? And among the other things, I'm not going to try to, I don't remember everything that he said, but one thing that I do remember that he said was that clearly the system of capitalism, at least as it is implemented here, has failed spectacularly. And this is an attempt to put forward some sort of modernized capitalism so that they can justify keeping the capitalism system per se in place and convince you that it can work. We just need to tweak it. So that was his explanation of what was going on with the Great Reset. As far as the military and gaming, I know that they have gotten into that business. We certainly know that. I don't know that
since the beginning. It's military simulation. The video gaming industry is built on military simulation technology. It was a military enterprise before it was fun.
But there are some games that are just built by, just independent. Some of them I think grew organically. I'd have to look at that myself. That goes all the way back to the 80s, but I guess it could be.
I would recommend we did a webinar on augmented mixed reality, which is what this is coming. And my friend Joseph, who's spent 30 years in the gaming industry, he's a combat veteran and had done AI, blockchain. He's done pretty much everything. It's an open revolving door between military contractors and game design. And I would encourage people to spend some time looking at the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is out of the University of Southern California. And that was created in, I say, the early 2000s. And there was a symposium that came together, and the military and the entertainment industry said, we're both interested in simulations and we're both pretty good at it. Why don't we collaborate? And so
that I can understand.
The Army Research Lab, and the key players who developed it, I can't remember his name right off the bat, was a high-level Disney executive. So they've spent the past 20 years developing synthetic people, essentially. And a lot of it for, again, military gameplay of military, various military engagements. But now it's gone bigger because it's actually virtual world building.
Yeah. I'm a little bit familiar with where it has gone with that, but I mean, gaming has been around since computers, because there were always people just messing around with. I mean, especially back then, it could be a pretty boring job doing all that kinds of work. I can remember um, people in an engineering lab that I worked in college. I think it was the Bear. I'm not sure exactly which network it was, but they would talk to people. They would mess around with other people at other universities, and there were some little text based games back then. So
Well, like a lot of it, there's a good book called The Friendly Orange Glow about the Plato system, actually at Urbana-Champaign. But that was all funded by the Navy, right? So it's all fundamentally like you may be someone who's working in an academic research institute developing the games, but most of all of the money flowing into these university systems was military funding. Like it was all coming out of the apparatus. So, and I think that's hard for people to grasp because it seems so fun. And even within the augmented reality, it's not at this point all internal into a screen-based game, is that it's going to lay on the land in these smart environments. So they're pushing now, and you'll see it in advertising and other elements coming up, is that augmented reality, that the expansion of this Pokemon Go premise, that layers of data are on the physical environment, both in where, the domicile where you live and out in the world that you operate in. And that connection to the GIS system, again, all military, like Niantic, which is pushing augmented reality, mixed reality, their seed funding is the CIA.
Yeah, well, I understand now where this is. It's just the idea that from the start it always was this. It always had this purpose. I guess that's where I would have to disagree, because, for example, in the late '90s, Bill Gates, at the time I'd worked for a company where Microsoft was. We were one of their big clients, and so we had Microsoft people, and we used to get early versions of their software, things like that. I happened to be messing around with the internet at that time in the early '90s. The framework for software development then was totally different. It was not internet based. They weren't even looking like that. And all the way to the late '90s, Bill Gates totally, he missed the boat. He did not see it coming. He did not position his company for developing systems that would take advantage of the internet or be fully integrated with the internet. And I was at a Microsoft event, their big developer conference event, and with my boss. And he basically did a bit of a mea culpa. And he was still the, I guess, CEO and chairman at the time. So he could turn this huge company on a dime, and he did. He pretty much shut down all the projects and reoriented toward internet based systems. But it was a big, big, big embarrassment for me. He wrote this book about the future and all this stuff, and like the internet wasn't part of it. So these visionaries, the fact that they could even imagine all of these things way back when, I think it's much more logical that they were co-opted along the way. Like the dot-com crash in 2000 was at least in part, some of it was crazy speculative investment, but it also was in part the bricks and mortar industries, as we called it then, um, going like, oh my God, I didn't take this thing seriously. We gotta stop this train, at least until we can jump on it or start driving it. So there's some of that, I think. Just that's a perspective, I think.
I mean, a book that really informed my thinking just about the larger processes is Yasha Levine's Surveillance Valley. I know a lot of folks read Shoshana Zuboff, but like the military history of the internet. And, when I went and I did some speaking in Salt Lake City, because a lot of this is based in Silicon Slopes there, but I was not familiar with the role of the University of Utah. I had known that Salt Lake City was one of the first ARPA nodes, and so it went way back in the development of the internet, but I was not aware at the time that the conceptualization for the internet took place at a ski resort outside in Salt Lake County at the Alta Ski Resort. And so it was actually plotted out there by the government and the scientists they brought together, and they sort of, not quite on the back of a napkin, but they said, like, this is how we think that this is going to work. And so the University of Utah has had somewhat of a low profile in my, like, maybe if you're on the inside, but their specialty has been visualization and simulations. And so some of the first digital objects in the 70s were developed there. There's something called, you might be familiar, the Utah teapot. And I can't remember the scientist, but he had a Melita teapot that he sketched. There was something about the curves and the handle that made it a very good example for how to do visual design digital. And he translated the sketch of the teapot into code into this virtual space. And so it became sort of a touch point for people who did that sort of digital assets in virtual space. For decades after that, everyone, there were like little homages to the digital, to the Utah teapot. But understanding, especially because Salt Lake City, Jim Sorensen, and actually there are quite a lot of ties to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, very influential Utah business people, a lot of connections to gene therapy and genomics and ancestry.com in that area. The idea of video compression software, virtualization simulation is key to building the virtual world that is coming. And I would also say a lot of the simulation, and I think we're eventually going to get around to talking about education work. There's something called transmedia learning, where this online education is going to morph, not simply based in a tablet or a Chromebook, or a phone, but more towards wearable technology and other immersive realities. And a leader in that space, her name is Elaine Rayborn, and she's out of Sandia National Labs in New Mexico. But she would do a program with the advanced distributed learning. So they have been building for a really long time this ability to capture data analytics off of wearable tech and haptic technology, which goes hand in hand with the gaming industry, the haptics and increasingly the Oculus Rifts and the headset wear. So they've been building immersive learning systems and the ability to capture data analytics on how you act in mixed reality and upload these biometric data, skill data into a learning locker. And that is sort of the future of education, but it's based on this human performance markup language that is tightly grounded in soldier training device.
What's
that's happening in Orlando?
Human performance markup
language, HPML.
Tell me more about that.
So it's linked to what's called XAPI technology, tin can API. So before the learning management systems, which again, all came out of like online.
Okay, so this is probably a Fitbit along the lines of the Fitbit world, right?
Yeah. So the trajectory was that Bill Clinton in the mid 90s signed something called Executive Order 13111, which was essentially saying, distance learning is great. We should work on it for the National Guard and Department of Defense. And then, by the way, all federal employees, distance learning is great. And by the way, it's great for every American. We're just all going to do distance learning. And so this is 93, 94, like really pre-cloud, like,
Wow.
And so it was piloted with like the Navy. So they would say, oh, there's somebody in a submarine in the South Pacific. They're not going to wait till they go to Norfolk to get trained on the new software. We're going to do distance learning. So that was the entry point. But then it scaled. It started to scale. And like we would never imagine that the time would come that it would be replacing face-to-face human-based education, but that's where it was going. So that first element was called SCORM, like Shareable Content Object Reference Module. And that worked on a screen. That worked like when a kid, like even up until recently, if a child had a laptop or a Chromebook for, I'm trying to think, Reed Hastings, like normal online learning systems, these boring things. SCORM worked for capturing that data analytics, but it didn't work for phones. It didn't work for ICT tablets. It didn't work for wearable tech. And so they needed to develop the next layer, which is XAPI. And the XAPI protocol, or Tin Can API, it's out of Johnson Problem Solutions out of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, but they were military contractors. And so they developed, essentially they've framed out simulation technology. They're saying like, for your lifelong learning program, it's no longer simply going to be that you're learning from when you're 3 years old in preschool until you're, 30 and you have your advanced degree, you're going to have to reskill perpetually because AI is going to take over the world, and you're not going to, whatever you know this month is going to be no good the next month. You have to always be reskilling. And when I talk later about these human capital markets, it's going to be based on the reskilling points. It is almost like we're trapped in an AI video game, again, like this mix that we are chasing to self-improve our humanity to try to keep up with a digital simulated artificial reality run universe as they are imagining it. So this XAPI is a cost savings because they're like, it's cheaper than an online class. What we'll just do is build a virtual simulation. And again, they've built these for the military, all kinds of training modules for the soldiers. I actually have something called PAL, which is like your online tutor on a phone, and it just teaches you in 2-minute nuggets, like no real education. And we're going to translate all of that military R&D to the whole populace. And then we're going to create incentives where people have to demonstrate that they've achieved skills. And these skills could be like, on the one hand, in the military, like you're raiding this compound and that you've effectively, or you're meeting with this community elder and you are displaying culturally appropriate language, in this setting. That's the military setting. But in Walmart, it's like you can sell the barbecue grill. We've showed you how to appropriately go through all of the steps to properly sell the barbecue grill with the, the best incentive, the best pricing to maximize, whatever, the payment plan on the barbecue grill. And that's what they're going to do. And it's all based on the same military tech. And it's going, and people can't even imagine that this wearable technology exists. But like, I've written a piece, it's called Boiling Frogs. It's about this human capital pipeline, but in there is a slide share from JCA Solutions, which is out of Orlando, and they build these things. And they have a flow chart saying in the VR headset with the haptics, we can capture all of this data. We can capture your eye movement, your pulse rate, your performance metrics, your emotion sensing. And their example was a child teaching a child how to properly pet a dog that they didn't know. So they would break the task down into like 30 steps, and then they would teach you what the proper steps were, and then they would grade you. And then they would say, well, this child never petted any dogs. Well, this child petted, like if they didn't pet the dog properly, you didn't get the skill point. And so when we're talking about like Microsoft, I think that there was actually a lot of the stuff with the haptics, like the Kinect software, that was, while people were playing their video games in front of their TV, they were training these data systems in gait recognition, in body movement recognition. And that stuff is all going to be fed back into domain awareness system with Michael Bloomberg and the Panopticon. And no one really thought when we were playing our video games in front of our TV that we were creating data sets that were going to track our biometric gait analysis in the real world. But I think we were. Yeah. And can I say that they knew how it was all going to play out in advance? I'm not sure. Like, surely I can't get in Bill Gates's head or Michael Bloomberg's head, but we are actually surrounded in a gamified. And if we go all the way back to, like, I'm reading this book, Hugh Everett III, about many universes. And Princeton, he was a physicist at Princeton, and von Neumann. It's this game theory, and the game theory has always been back to military gaming. A lot of it is managing the world as weighted choice architecture, and these nudges that are coming, the digital nudges, and to maybe not force you to do something, but to create frictions in systems, digital systems, that make you more likely to act in ways that power wants you to act.
Right.
And you may not even know it, because you may not even know that you're operating in a game. It's crazy. I know, it's a lot to think about.
So the financialization of it, so the impact investors that you talk about, the social impact investors.
Yeah.
So, and from bigger picture, right? So as you mentioned, huge concentration of wealth and power, constantly a predatory nature, constantly looking for things that return on investment, right?
Yeah.
Because, for obvious reasons.
So if I can continue on education, education is Sustainable Development Goal 4. So they're very specific. And so for these
from the WEF,
this is the UN. The United Nations is essentially an extension of the World Economic. They have partnered in 2019. They sort of joined. So now the United Nations is channeling the global capital through the World Economic Forum. And the metrics of improvement across these different categories. So like one is poverty, number 2 is hunger, number 3 is health, number 4 is education, number 5 is gender equity. Like they have all of these are numbered. There's the judicial, everything becomes a data, something you could represent on a dashboard. And that is happening because to run the global capital through these systems in this virtual simulation of life and improvement, you have to show improvement on the dashboard to make these deals work. It's all aligned to the rules of the game, which is what the impact management project is about. And people should definitely, when people speak broadly of like, oh, I don't know who was in charge of this thing, it's just too hard to figure out. I'm like, go to the impact management project. Those are the people. It's the 2,000 largest asset holders, right? So it's everything from, Blackstone, but also down to your TIAA-CREF, right? If you've got money, and that includes a lot of the faith institutions, the Vatican Bank, as I mentioned, is running this healthcare preventative thing. They want your data and they want to give you telemedicine and digitally simulated education, and they want to track your food assistance points with a DNA nudge band, because it's only about the data for them, because that's what allows them to channel their capital through the system. So education is number 4. I'll just build off of that. Yeah. They need to make their investment in human capital a success metric around education, and they fudge the numbers. Like they'll just come up with something. I fought standardized testing for years. That was the thing. Everybody knew that a 3rd grade test score was only some very inaccurate measure of meaningful education, right? What it meant was that you learned to take the Pearson test better. And oftentimes they would give kids tests before they learned anything to make the numbers look better. Like, here, let's test them before we taught them anything. And like, look, now they learned something. Maybe and after multiple times, they learn how to take the test better. Not that they're more knowledgeable citizens.
Training for the test. Yeah.
Training for the test. So that's always been very clear. But the interesting thing is in education, they're focused on 2 areas now, pre-K and workforce development. Okay, so these are sort of bookending. And then there's some 3rd grade literacy tucked in, but these are the main areas of human capital finance. The pre-K area that also bleeds back into maternal healthcare and home visits, because they want to contain the young children for this crazy transhumanist future. That equation that gave the cost offset was developed by someone, his name is Jim Heckman. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist at University of Chicago, the Becker-Friedman School of Economics. Surprise, surprise. Well, what is kind of surprising is that almost his sole funder for that program is Open Society. Okay, so Soros is funding the Becker-Friedman School of Economics, which, but when people want to imagine that there's 2 different camps, there's not 2 different camps. It's the same camp. So these prestigious institutions create analytics equations that justify the data surveillance and the management of children and dispossessed people and people who are vulnerable. And some of his money came from the Pritzker family. So J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. So Pritzker and Heckman went up and down California pitching to community foundations this great investment in pre-K, that you could get a 7 to 10% annualized rate of return. They promised up to 13% if you got health data. And this was pre-pandemic, right? So now the health data is in there. But what they said was, we can't actually change cognitive numbers for the data dashboards, because it's not really about educating. It's just about making the numbers look good. Around the age of 8 to 10, Heckman said, the numbers harden up. We can't, and what the hedge funds need, because this is also being securitized and people are betting against the kids, we need swinging in the numbers. And cognitive skills, that hardens up. But what we can change is character. We can change their mindset, and they can do that with video games. They can do that with digital programming. They can actually digitally program children in the way they want to serve the financial markets, right? Which sounds insane, but they have said this. And this is what
they put this down on paper or in speeches or whatever, right?
Yeah. I mean, Heckman is working with Robert Duger, who was the former hedge fund manager for Paul Tudor Jones, which I had mentioned earlier, with the Robin Hood Foundation and Tudor Investments. And then also Art Rolnick, Art Rolnick helped set up, it's called the Invest in Kids Working Group. And he was a chief economist at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. So they set up this investing in kids paradigm. But the investing in kids paradigm, especially when you say what we need to change is children's character, meaning their social emotional learning, you'll hear a lot about social emotional learning curriculum coming online, is that you have something called the Hatch We Play Smart table, Hatch Education. It's compatible with Microsoft, by the way. And it's like a big screen TV, like parallel to the floor, with two fisheye lens cameras, one on either corner. And the children, these preschool age children, Head Start children, Black and brown children, are supposed to play at this table together and do like digital puzzles and things, because there's not real, it's not physical, it's just a screen. And they're supposed to interact on this table, and the camera films them and scores their social behavior.
What?
And this is real. And so this is running through something called EduCare, which is a franchise Head Start pre-K program that's in a number of major cities in the Bay Area, in Chicago. It started out in Chicago under Rauner, but it's both Pritzker and Rauner. It's bipartisan. Diana Rauner, and then it's in Tulsa. So Tulsa is a test bed for all these technologies, and it's the George Kaiser Foundation. Well, I have confirmation that the Hatch We Play Smart tables are in use in North Tulsa, Head Start, the 100th anniversary of the race massacre. And the head of George Kaiser's foundation, who's kind of, overseeing all this happening, his name is Ken Levitt, and he was an advisor to George Tenet of the CIA. So I don't want to know these things. I clearly do not want to necessarily know these things, but once you know them, how can you in good conscience stand aside and let this happen?
Right. And
this is the creation of human capital bond markets. And this is, Heckman invited people to the University of Chicago. They have a whole plethora of several conferences on social emotional learning, where they brought in esteemed researchers from all over the country, and some were international. And they had a gentleman who was connected to a company called Otis, OTUS. And it's one of these testing companies for social emotional learning. And he said, and this is still on this University of Chicago's website, well, as a former administrator of a suburban Chicago public school, do you think I'm going to tell parents we're tracking their children's neuroticism? Nope.
And he said it, right?
Yeah. And then Heckman actually said, when they were talking about trying to get the kids on the apps, this is the PBS Kids apps, these pre-K school readiness apps. And the guy said, I'm trying to do this research, but the parents aren't using the apps enough. They're not making the kids use the apps. They're too busy. And Heckman said, well, you just need a good incentive. You're treating parents like an expert, and parents aren't experts. They don't know anything. You should gamify it for them. You should create a build a kid game for the parents, but you need a good incentive, like maybe pornography. He said that. He said an incentive like pornography. And you could see everyone, and this is an oak paneled room in Chicago, University of Chicago. Everyone's looking at him like, did he just say that? And he's like, well, they're just kind of kidding about the pornography, but really, I mean a good incentive to make the low-income parents make their kids be on these apps. And I was in Philadelphia, and I approached the head of community relations for our NPR station at an event about this social impact media. And I said, listen, this is a real problem. This behavior tracking games and these apps with PBS Kids, this is not going to go well. And this was a woman who was probably in her 60s, a Black woman. And I said, this is not going to be good for Black and brown kids in Head Start that they're on these behavior tracking apps. And she just looked at me and she said, well, what do you want me to do about it? We all take the money. I built my whole career on Ford Foundation grants. So this is like my lived experience. Like, for whatever it's worth, I was put in places to see these things happen. And then it is on our conscience to decide, do we look the other way when we know that this is happening? This is a war on life. This is a war on children. This is a war being waged by the military and financial apparatus with the end game not simply to control life and to profit from life, but to force people to build a planetary computer that will ultimately consume their life force and virtualize them as a game character that is under their control. And I don't see it any other way. I mean, they are pretty clear about what they're trying. The question is, will people resist it, and how fast is it going?
Yeah, resist it if they have any idea what's going on. Let's, on that note,
Sorry.
let's roll. No, let's roll into the bonus question and try to bring it to today.
Okay.
Let's, I would say zoom in, but that's not really the case. We're just switching to a different track. So, so the new normal agenda that we keep, that's in modern parlance, right? That's sort of prolific. That's a term that was deliberately put out in a lot of propaganda, celebrity figures, political figures talking about new normals. So this agenda that's been presented to us, maybe it evolved over a long period of time, over decades. I mean, I don't see how you could put plans like this together except over long periods of time. But all of a sudden, it seems to be fast tracked. It even seems rushed to me. So, and I'm talking obviously about the pandemic measures being part of a larger agenda. Now, let's talk about that. And also, I'm going to combine two of our questions together here and try to do it this way. But you already kind of answered one of these about common threads. And, you have shell companies, you have foundations and trusts and things like that. And so it's not always hard. It's not always easy to figure out, even just in political campaigns, the dark money. You don't always know where the funding's coming from. But if you do a lot of research and digging, you must have come across common threads. And you hinted at this earlier in the interview. Yeah. So if we could just talk about, first of all, this agenda and the fast tracking of it, and what the pandemic measures, how does that play into this larger agenda that you're talking about? And what common threads did you find in what foundations, what sources of money? I know this isn't always a simple thing, right? Because if it's a fund, it's actually lots of people's money, private wealth funds, things like that. But let's talk about that as to who or what is behind it and why is it being fast tracked, assuming that the pandemic measures are part of this larger agenda, which I think we both agree are.
Yeah.
The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap up.
And, for those of us who are our age, we're kind of semi-disposable at this point. But our stand, the stand that we can take is for the 3-year-olds on the surveillance play tables. That's what I'm trying to say is whatever this future is, I don't think most of us who are awake enough to see this bigger picture are going to be content trying to fit ourselves into this virtual world. But we have to take a principled stand from a position of love and spirited, energetic resistance to that future being for children who have no informed consent of this.
That's a great way to wrap it up. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Please tell everybody again, if you would, how to find and let's continue this conversation. I wasn't very useful for this one because it's pretty overwhelming.
It's a lot.
But
I'll be sure to send you the stuff on the HTML. Maybe now that I know that that's your background, maybe.
Well, that's my mind's always going off into the technical parts that I do know, or the history of it that I do know.
Yeah.
Going from sort of macro to micro. Yeah. But anyway, I am persistent though. So let's keep at it.
Curious and persistent is good. So I'm at wrenchinthegears.com, WRENCHINTHEGEARS, throw a wrench in the gears. And I have a YouTube channel, we'll cross post, I guess, Alison McDowell, just look me up. I'm on Twitter at Philly852. And I'm looking for dandelions because we're doing some resistance strategies. So ceremony with dandelions. So if you guys around the world, we're trying for global solidarity, a global peace movement of love and dandelions against the machine. If you look up Dandelion Manifesto on my blog, it has my address, and I welcome some donations if you want to send them my way.
Okay. Great talking with you. Take good care. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Alison McDowell. Follow her on Twitter at Philly852, subscribe to her YouTube channel, and find her work on her website, wrenchinthegears.com. This podcast is independent media. Listener support's important. rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Find the podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Rockfin, Patreon, or on YouTube, and some more platforms still coming. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter @aroundtheempire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care.